Right, so for this lecture, I want you to keep in mind some guiding themes. Abnormality is an approximation. That just means it's kind of hard to really pinpoint when it's closer to the norm. It's easy to point out someone that's crazy because they're on the extreme, but a lot of these psych disorders are more common than you think, which covers the second point. Psych disorders are common. I also want you to keep in mind to reduce stigmatization. As psychologists and people who are interested in psychology, we should really have a reduced stigma towards seeking mental help and people who have mental illnesses. So I want you to walk away with at least reducing the stigmatization and encouraging others to reduce that. One important idea that comes from this chapter is the diathesis stress model, which we'll cover more in detail later, so keep in mind. What you want to get from this chapter is being able to generally categorize symptoms. If we give you a case study, you should kind of be able to recognize that it's one disorder over the other. Usually disorder has a prominent feature, although many disorders do have both effects, have effects from many disorders, but there's always generally a prominent disorder. Another issue is self-diagnosing. So you might start to think that you have some of these problems, and I think that's true. We all have some of these problems to some extent, but not to the extent of having a disorder. Alright, if you ever read this book or watch the movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a pretty good representation of an asylum, although our mental asylums are not like what it's portrayed in this book anymore, but it's still a good movie book to watch and read. So here are some quotes about mental or psychological disorders, or madness in a sense. You're only given a little spark of madness, you mustn't lose it, by Robin Williams. There's no great genius without a mixture of madness, Aristotle, and insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So there are a lot of beliefs about insanity and madness. Usually the belief is that it goes along with creativity and genius. So psych disorders, what are they? They're atypical behaviors, different than normal. Thinking that others are after you is a sign of paranoia. They're disturbing determined by others. So the person suffering from disorder may not perceive it to be a disturbing disorder. So it's a kind of a social norm to determine if that behavior is indeed a disorder. They're maladaptive. They cause distress. They're disabling, and they increase risk towards the individual. So some caveats is smoking tobacco, depressing, drinking alcohol to excess are maladaptive behaviors, but they're not psych disorders because it's socially accepted. Unjustifiable, they cannot be rationally justified. Whenever we do some irrational things, it's considered hinging on a disorder. Belief in past lives depends on society, and some cultures do believe in past lives, although it can't not be rational, not really proven. So again, a cultural norm makes it acceptable. So how do we define psychological disorders? As we just mentioned, it's hard to define based on normality. What's considered normal to your culture, your immediate social circle, wouldn't be considered a mental disorder. Consider cult worships. If you're in a cult and you worship certain things, within that cult you're considered normal, but within society as a whole you're considered abnormal. So, a mental disorder can be defined as a persistent disturbance or dysfunction in behavior, thoughts, or emotions that cause significant distress or impairment. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, focuses on what counts as disturbance, or what disturbances count as mental disorders, how long must they last to be considered persistent, and how much distress or impairment is required. So, what behavior are considered disturbances, how long does the behavior last, and what harm it may cause to the self or others. I'm more familiar with the DSM-4 treatment, TR, text revision. I haven't read anything from the DSM-5, but back when I took a class in abnormal psych, we used the DSM-4 to actually diagnose and give our diagnoses of case studies. So, psychology's medical model versus choice. So this link will lead you to 9 things you should not say to someone with mental illness. It's the idea of choice and some people still do believe this, that mental illness is a choice, especially regarding depression. So some comments is stop focusing on the bad stuff and just start living. You can snap out of it. Everyone feels this way sometimes. So we all have moments of sadness, and then we assume that people who are suffering from depression is just a slightly more extreme version of our sadness, and since we are able to get out of our depressed state, we assume that they are just not trying hard enough, and that's completely wrong. There are usually depression has biological bases, so it's not as easy as just your mentality. It's not a choice. Sometimes you require medication to help you get out of your depressed mood and depressed state, rather. So our current model is the medical model and conceptualizes abnormal psychological experiences as illnesses that, like physical illnesses, have biological and environmental causes, define symptoms, and possible cures. The label is important in changing perspectives regarding mental illness. In contrast, here's a joke video regarding Stan's dad has alcoholism. I won't show you the video, but you can follow the Prezi link. Basically, Stan's dad is an alcoholic, and he feels alcoholism as a disease, and he's dying from it, and it's a joke about him treating it as a serious disease. So, where to begin? We begin with diagnoses. Clinicians seek to determine the nature of a person's mental disorder by assessing signs, objectively observe indicators of a disorder, and symptoms, subjectively reported behavior, thoughts, and emotions that suggest an underlying illness. So a person might come with a presenting symptom, and a clinician would rather take that into account, but also look at the signs. Sometimes we, especially with severe mental disorders, we are not aware of the signs. So we might think we have one thing and we actually have another. So since mental disorders affect the mind, it's really hard in some states, in some cases, to trust the patient with all the information. So a disorder refers to a common set of signs and symptoms. A disease is a known pathological process affecting the body. So the medical model treats a disorder as a disease, so understanding that it has a process. A diagnosis is determination as to whether a disorder or a disease is present. I think the medical model tends to combine the two. So the DSM-4 versus the DSM-5. This is how the DSM-4 characterizes it. Just some examples. Just a stressor need 2 of 2. So 1, if they experience, witness, or confront it with a traumatic event, or 2, intense fear, helplessness, or horror. So you need to have these symptoms present for PTSD. So traumatic re-experience need 1 of 5, so you need 1 of any of these 5. So you need A, B, and so on. 3 of 7, and then 2 of 5. So a patient must come in and be present with, or must be presenting these different conditions to be classified as PTSD. When the whole DSM actually has a lot of different classifications, and they have similar states like this. So if they aren't presenting with all of these 3 of 7 as needed, they might actually fit another diagnosis. So that's why they have these criteria. So the DSM-5 is slightly different on these categories. The DSM-5 also drops the Global Assessment Functioning Scale, or the GAF scale. So the lower you are on this scale, the worse condition you are. So just different symptoms. Generally, if you have a lot of bad events going on, your global assessment of functioning tends to decrease. But you guys can check that out. So yeah, they don't come alone. Most mental disorders greater than 80% report comorbidity, the co-occurrence of 2 or more disorders in a single individual. If you want to see all the disorders possible, you can hit this link. The biopsychosocial perspective explains that mental disorders are a result of interactions among bio, psycho, and social factors. All, which basically says all and nothing at all. Yeah, everything matters in this perspective. So I don't think it contributes all that much. So I think a better idea to take away from this is the diathesis stress model. It's a more workable model. It suggests that a person may be predisposed for a psychological disorder that remains unexpressed until triggered by stress. So this is the idea on that. So a person can have a high vulnerability or low vulnerability. And this is a biological predisposition based on many factors. Yeah, some of it is, as you will read later, genetics. If it runs in the family or not, you have a higher or lower vulnerability. But your mental disorder doesn't activate until you receive sufficient stress. So being with high vulnerability, your stress handling capabilities are already low. So in a sense, it's filled up more. So adding more stress to it, you overflow, and once you overflow, you start suffering from a mental disorder. So this explains individual variation on reaction to traumatic events. Some individuals break down from traumatic events, and others persevere. So just to cover some new directions for the DSM, this is mentioned in your book, the Research Domain Criteria Project, a new initiative that aims to guide the classification and understanding of mental disorders by revealing the basic processes that give rise to them. It focuses on biological factors from genes to cells to brain circuits, psych domains such as learning, attention, memory, and various social processes and behavior. Important, as it would also account for comorbidity. So this idea is researching based on what is the common underlying factors rather than each disorder in its own diagnosis. It's trying to determine what causes the disorder. I think it'll take a while before this actually is applied. So we're covering 2 chapters. We'll cover psych disorder and treatments interchangeably. I think they go together this way better. So it's going to be a lot of jumping around, so integration is best. So treatment of psych disorders, there are various treatment options. Individual variations exist, from reactivity to treatment, how one reacts to treatment. So one size does not fit all. The best approach is an interaction between the biopsychosocial. This is a reoccurring theme. So expect some review of neurotransmitters. After all, mental illness is a disease of the mind. So some prevalence estimates 46.4% of people in the United States suffer from some type of mental disorder at some point in their life. 26.2% suffer from at least one disorder during a given year. So these are some pretty high estimates. Mental disorders typically have earlier ages of onset than physical disorders and are associated with significant impairments in the form of an inability to carry out daily activities. Depression is the fourth leading cause of disability worldwide and expected to rise to the second leading cause of disability by 2020. So this highlights how common mental disorders are. So let's take a break. Let's see, how do I